Hi, everybody. It's Jim, Bright Books, Big Ideas. Welcome back to my deep dive series on Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, his first autobiography. And we are now moving into chapters 6 and 7, two of my favorite chapters in the entire book. The major themes in these chapters are literacy and knowledge, and the relationship between knowledge and power. And you're going to learn a lot about the impact that slavery has not only on slaves, but on the slaveholders. Let's jump right into it. We're going to be close reading some passages today. I think you're going to learn a lot. We'll start here with chapter 6. And we were introduced to Mrs. Auld, the new mistress. Mr. and Mrs. Auld live in Baltimore. Frederick Douglass, the young boy, has moved to Baltimore to be their house slave, and he's been very impressed at how Mrs. Auld treats him. And she is quoted here as being a woman of the kindest heart and finest feelings. She had never had a slave under her control previously to myself. By trade, Mrs. Auld was a weaver, and he says she had been in good degree preserved from the blighting and dehumanizing effects of slavery. There is our theme of dehumanization coming back. So let's write that down. Slavery is a system that dehumanizes people. It dehumanizes the slaves. It dehumanizes the slave holders too. Very important point. Douglass says, I was utterly astonished at her goodness. He didn't even know how to behave. No white woman before had ever looked at him this way. He's flummoxed by it. The crouching servility, usually so acceptable a quality in a slave, did not answer when manifested toward her. She doesn't want him to look at her in a servile way. He's just not prepared for any of this. This is like cognitive dissonance for Frederick. She's disturbed by his crouching servility. But what happened here? So this kind heart had but a short time to remain such. The fatal poison of irresponsible power was already in her hands and soon commenced its infernal work. That cheerful eye under the influence of slavery soon became red with rage. That voice, made all of sweet accord, changed to one of harsh and horrid discord, and that angelic face gave place to that of a demon. So you have these nice, rhetorical oppositions here, but the point here is power. Irresponsible power. This is toxic. This is dehumanizing. This changes angels to demons. Note also that by nature, Mrs. Auld is a good person. She's perfectly fine. She has compassion. She has decency. She's willing to teach Frederick his ABCs. But look at what slavery is about to do to her. So we have a very dramatic scene coming up when she starts to do what any parent or guardian would do with a child at that age who's unschooled. They will teach the child his ABCs. She's assisting him, learning to spell, piece together basic words. But when Mr. Auld found out what was going on, he forbade Mrs. Auld to instruct me further, telling her, among other things, that it was unlawful as well as unsafe to teach a slave to read. It was literally against the law. Now you're going to get into some toxic logic, and you're going to see some racial epithets, which I will not quote aloud. I'll make a substitution for that. You can read it for yourself. But we have to work through this logic in order to understand how slavery operates. Why is it unsafe to teach a slave to read? To use his own words further, he said, if you give an N-word an inch, he will take an L. An N-word should know nothing but to obey his master, to do as he is told to do. So a slave really has one major job to do, and that is to obey. Learning, which is the natural outcome of learning to read and write, learning would spoil the best N-word in the world. Now, said he, if you teach that N-word, speaking of myself, how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master. The only value a slave has is they do work obediently. If they learn things, they begin to question things, they become resistant. They will not obey. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master. As to himself, now, how is this literacy that you're about to teach Frederick Douglass, how's it going to affect the slave? Interesting here. Pay attention. It could do him no good, but a great deal of harm. It would make him discontented and unhappy. You might ask yourself, why? Why would learning to read and write make the slave unhappy? Mr. Auld's going to lay this out for you. And as he's doing this, within earshot, Frederick Douglass is hanging on every word and learning a major lesson. These words sank deep into my heart, stirred up sentiments within that lay slumbering, and called into existence an entirely new train of thought. It was a new and special revelation, explaining dark and mysterious things with which my youthful understanding had struggled, but struggled in vain. Important point, I now understood what had been to me a most perplexing difficulty, to wit, the white man's power to enslave the black man. This is an important stuff. It was a grand achievement, and I prized it highly. From that moment, I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. What is the pathway from slavery to freedom? Well, the path starts with learning to read, learning to write, and then gaining knowledge. Knowledge is power. And that's one of the major themes of this chapter. Knowledge is power. Power, one of the big themes in the book, right? And if you withhold knowledge from people, keeping them illiterate, you have power over them. You know more than they do. If those people who are oppressed then acquire knowledge, they become more powerful. They have the potential to be something more. They're going to realize, they're going to become, dare I say it, woke. I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. It was just what I wanted, and I got it at a time when I the least expected it. Whilst I was saddened by the thought of losing the aid of my kind mistress, I was gladdened by the invaluable instruction which by the merest accident I had gained from my master. The master, Mr. Auld, is schooling his wife, telling her, I forbid you to teach this kid to read. But he doesn't realize accidentally he's also schooling Frederick Douglass. I set out. Okay, let's see what he said. Though conscious of the difficulty of learning without a teacher, how's he going to learn to read without a teacher? I set out with high hope and a fixed purpose at whatever cost of trouble to learn how to read. The very decided manner with which he spoke and strove to impress his wife with the evil consequences of giving me instruction served to convince me that he was deeply sensible of the truths he was uttering. He's speaking with such conviction that this must be true. I must pay attention to him. I must learn. It gave me the best assurance that I might rely with the utmost confidence on the results which he said would flow from teaching me to read. And then there's a really nice oratorical flourishes coming up here. Just listen to the repetitions, the parallelism, the anaphora. What he most dreaded, that I most desired. What he most loved, that I most hated. That which to him was a great evil, to be carefully shunned, was to me a great good, to be diligently sought. And the argument which he so warmly urged against my learning to read only served to inspire me with a desire and determination to learn. Irony. In learning to read, I owe almost as much to the bitter opposition of my master as to the kindly aid of my mistress. I acknowledge the benefit of both. Okay, so do you understand the logic here? Knowledge is power. Literacy enables you to learn, to acquire knowledge. We must prevent the oppressed slave from learning to read because we don't want him to acquire knowledge. If he acquires knowledge, he becomes unruly, will disobey, will want to seek freedom. This is what Frederick Douglass wants more than anything else. So now he has a pathway. If I learn to read and write, I will be on the pathway to freedom. The problem is, how does he learn to read now with Mrs. Auld not going to teach him? She will not disobey her husband. We talk here towards the end of the chapter about how city slaves are treated differently from country slaves. There's a more of a sense of civility, of decency, which will tend to curb the more cruel punishments that are regularly visited on slaves in the rural areas. But that doesn't mean that cruelty doesn't exist in the city of Baltimore. And he cites the example of Henrietta and Mary, two slaves of Mr. Thomas Hamilton and his wife, who were basically starved, emaciated, and also the mistress of that household was vicious with the whipping. Okay. All right, that finishes up chapter 6. Let's move to chapter 7. We're going to now learn how resourceful Frederick Douglass is, how he continues to learn to read with some assistance, and then also learns to write, and then how this all impacts things. So he lives in this family with his family in Baltimore for about 7 years, and he does succeed in learning to read and write. So something happened here with Mrs. Auld that we're going to observe here too, where she basically laid the foundation. She gave him some fundamentals, so he's got like a leg up, but now he's got to go the rest of the way on his own. But what happened to Mrs. Auld? She used to be a kind and tender-hearted woman, but in entering upon the duties of a slaveholder, she did not seem to perceive that I sustained to her the relation of a mere chattel, and that for her to treat me as a human being was not only wrong, but dangerously so. Slavery proved as injurious to her as it did to me. And this gets to this idea of dehumanization, that the slave owners are dehumanized just as much as the slaves are. When I went there, she was a pious, warm, and tender-hearted woman. There was no sorrow or suffering for which she had not a tear. She had bread for the hungry, clothes for the naked, and comfort for every mourner that came within her reach. Good Christian woman, slavery soon proved its ability to divest her of these heavenly qualities. Under its influence, the tender heart became stone, and the lamb-like disposition gave way to one of tiger-like fierceness. The first step in her downward course was in her ceasing to instruct me. She now commenced to practice her husband's precepts. She finally became even more violent in her opposition than her husband himself. It's like she overcompensates. And I always like to give this a slight feminist reading with my students, where I feel like as the wife, without as many rights as the husband, she's kind of in a relative position of slavery to her husband. So now he strongly forbade her to instruct his slave. So now she's got to prove herself to him by overcompensating and be even more violently opposed to him learning to read than the husband is. So I have some sympathy for Mrs. Auld here. She's in a box. From this time, I was most narrowly watched. So, anything that hinted of trying to learn to read would be noticed, and he would be reprimanded for it or punished. But nothing's going to prevent him from taking the L from the inch that has been provided to him. Now, how did he do it? This gets into the self-reliant nature of Frederick Douglass. Self-reliance is like part of the American character, and a resourceful kid. The plan which I adopted was that of making friends of all the little white boys whom I met in the street. As many of these as I could, I converted into teachers. With their kindly aid, obtained at different times and in different places, I finally succeeded in learning to read. And this is spelled out in the chapter. He would sometimes offer them bread. He would come up with like schemes to sort of almost trick them into teaching him how to read and write. And some of these boys were willing to teach him too. So he exchanges bread for the knowledge. He would like to name the boys who helped them, but prudence forbids that. He does say these kids lived on Philpott Street, very near Durgan and Bailey's shipyard. So again, he's trying to provide these authenticating details because the documentary veracity of the narrative is vital to the abolitionist cause. I would sometimes say to them, I wished I could be as free as they would be when they got to be men. You will be free as soon as you are 21, but I am a slave for life. Have not I as good a right to be free as you have? You can see, the knowledge is starting to kick in, the awareness and the desire to be free. These words used to trouble them. They would express for me the liveliest sympathy and console me with the hope that something would occur by which I might be free. So around the age of 12, now that he's learned to read, he gets a hold of a book called The Columbian Orator. And this is a book that you can actually find online. If I can find the link to it, I will share it. But you can read this book for yourself. Some libraries still have it. It's like an anthology. Every opportunity I got, I used to read this book. So he mentions two pieces in particular. One is a dialogue between a master and a slave, where the slave who had repeatedly run away and then got caught has a dialogue with the master. And in this dialogue, he is able to say some very smart as well as impressive things in reply to his master. So he comes up with an argument, things which had the desired, though unexpected effect, for the conversation resulted in the voluntary emancipation of the slave on the part of the master. So what does he learn from this? That you can use language, argument, persuasion, the appeal to truth, the appeal to reason to convince someone to set you free. An important lesson learned. In the same book, the second piece he was reading was by Sheridan, one of Sheridan's mighty speeches and in behalf of Catholic emancipation. This is referring to Ireland, I believe. These were choice documents to me. I read them over and over again. And then he talks about the lessons learned from these. The moral which I gained from the dialogue was the power of truth over the conscience of even a slaveholder. What I got from Sheridan was a bold denunciation of slavery and a powerful vindication of human rights. The reading of these documents enabled me to utter my thoughts. This is the power of reading, one of the powers. Things that are sort of malformed or just germinating in your mind. You have thoughts, but you can't give voice to them. Reading these other people's thoughts gives voice to these thoughts that you already had. Enabled me to utter my thoughts and to meet the arguments brought forward to sustain slavery. So it's giving him like persuasive fuel. But while they relieved me of one difficulty, they brought on another, even more painful than the one of which I was relieved. The more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. This is a super important point, because it generally speaks to, I think, a phenomenon many of us experience when we learn things, when we acquire knowledge, when we're exposed to new things. We read books, we pick up ideas. These ideas challenge us. They change our world, our worldview, and so forth. So let's pay close attention to this passage. The more I read, the more I was led to abhor and detest my enslavers. I could regard them in no other light than a band of successful robbers who had left their homes and gone to Africa and stolen us from our homes, and in a strange land reduced us to slavery. I loathed them as being the meanest as well as the most wicked of men. So it just makes them hate the slaveholders even more than they already did. As I read and contemplated the subject, behold, that very discontentment which Master Hugh had predicted would follow my learning to read had already come to torment and sting my soul to unutterable anguish. Knowledge does not always make you happy right away. And this is what we're observing. As I writhed under it, I would at times feel that learning to read had been a curse rather than a blessing. It had given me a view of my wretched condition without the remedy. It opened my eyes to the horrible pit, but to no ladder upon which to get out. In moments of agony, I envied my fellow slaves for their stupidity. I have often wished myself a beast. I preferred the condition of the meanest reptile to my own. Anything, no matter what, to get rid of thinking. It was this everlasting thinking of my condition that tormented me. There was no getting rid of it. It was pressed upon me by every object within sight or hearing, animate or inanimate. The silver trump of freedom had roused my soul to eternal wakefulness. Woke. Freedom now appeared, to disappear no more forever. It was heard in every sound and seen in everything. It was present to torment me with a sense of my wretched condition. I saw nothing without seeing it. I heard nothing without hearing it, and felt nothing without feeling it. It looked from every star. It smiled in every calm, breathed in every wind, and moved in every storm. He just, well, in a word, it makes him depressed. So when the light of knowledge shines on his experience, he realizes, I'm a slave. Here's what's going on. I hate these slaveholders even more, and I have no way to get out. I have the knowledge of my condition. I'm aware of it. I've awakened to it, but I don't have the means to get out of it. So he feels even more trapped than he was before. It's more punishing, more painful, and he feels the anguish of it. I often found myself regretting my own existence and wishing myself dead. And but for the hope of being free, I have no doubt that I should have killed myself or done something for which I should have been killed. While in this state of mind, I was eager to hear anyone speak of slavery. I was a ready listener. Okay, now it moves on to abolition. But just to finish this point, he gets virtually suicidal from this knowledge. So knowledge isn't always a good thing. And it brings up the question, is ignorance bliss? Is it better off if you're a slave to not know? It's a rhetorical question. Of course, he thinks the answer to that is just no. It's better to know. But you've got to push through a lot of pain, sadness, anguish. In the short term, it feels like it wasn't worth it. In the long term, it will be absolutely worth it. But let's not kid ourselves. When we learn things, you go to school, you go to college, you're self-taught, even you're reading, you're exposing yourself to new ideas. These things will challenge you. They will make you aware of certain situations that might not be pleasant, about who you are, where you came from, the culpability of people, or your own state of oppression. Like, wow, I didn't realize how bad it really is. This is awful. And then, what do you do with that knowledge? Are you going to let it crush you? Are you going to go off and slit your wrists? Or are you going to do something about it? Are you going to grow? This is kind of the position he's in right now. Okay, so as he's learning to read, he keeps hearing something about abolitionists. He doesn't know what that word means, and he eventually does learn the meaning of it. And he realizes, oh, this is a cause I need to pay attention to. And then he describes this scene down on the wharf where he's talking to two Irishmen, and he helps them unload some stuff. And one of the Irishmen asks him if he's a slave, and he says, I am. Are you a slave for life? I told him I was. And the good Irishman seemed to be deeply affected by that. He said, it's a pity that you're a slave for life. It's a shame. And they both advised me to run away to the north. They're planting a seed here. You could run away. You could get out of here. And you can find friends in the North, and you could be free. I pretended not to be interested and acted like he didn't understand them. Why? He feared they might be treacherous. White men have been known to encourage slaves to escape and then to get the reward, catch them, and return them to their masters. The air of suspicion and surveillance is just rife throughout this society. You know, these Irishmen probably were sincere, but he can't be sure. He cannot be sure, especially in the context of the fugitive slave laws. But the point of this story is this is where he sets the intention. I resolved to run away. On one of these days, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to escape. And now I need to learn to write too. So that is described in chapter 7. And again, he does this very resourcefully. So he describes how he would watch the shipyard workers labeling the pieces of timber with initials, and he learns to form these letters. And then he, anytime he would meet a boy who could write, he would say, "Oh, I can write as well as you can." And then they would like test it. And he would pick up a little bit more at every exchange. And he even would look at Master Thomas's a copybook, the kid that he's with in the house, and he would imitate the letter shapes in the copybooks, and he learns to write little by little. He's doing this all on the sly, and after many years, he succeeded in learning how to write. And I'll just close this little lesson with like a story of how I used to teach this in class. And I love to teach these chapters to first-year students in college because I wanted to instill in them the need for knowledge and what knowledge can do for you. So often in these college classes, the kinds of classes I would teach, they were required classes, and you were always fighting the resistance. Like, I don't want to be here. I just want to take classes in my major. What the hell do I have to take first year writing for, or intro to lit? And, this is why. Because if you learn to read and write and become better at it, you can gain power. Knowledge is power. But also, I was trying to point out to them, look at how privileged you are. You've had all this schooling, K through 12, here you are in college, and so many of you have a real bad attitude about learning. Maybe with some justification, I don't know. But you're lackadaisical about it. You're lazy. I didn't say this, but I thought it. You're lazy. You're complacent. And look at this guy who didn't have K through 12 school, who was forbidden to read and write. It was against the law. And yet he found a way as a little kid to teach himself with help from other boys and workers. I mean, if people would only understand the power of knowledge, they would get it. And also a lesson you can draw from this, if you're just outside of any kind of educational institution, which I think lots of times turns people off to knowledge, you can teach yourself. This book shows that. Like, you can learn if you're resourceful, if you're self-reliant, if you're willing to work with others, you have other people helping you too. You can do this. You don't have to go to school to learn. And I find these chapters to be super inspiring. So anyway, next on our journey through this book, I want to do chapters 8 and 9. And then on the episode after that, we'll do the very long chapter 10 all by itself. And then we'll finish with one more episode on chapter 11 and the appendix. Let me know what you think about these themes of dehumanization, irresponsible power, knowledge, and the relationship between knowledge and literacy. I think it's essential. It's really important, but it's not without its complications, as we just looked at. Thanks as always for watching. Hope again to see you soon. Bye-bye.